And our last presenter of the day is Christina Davies. Everything's up here, yep. Welcome.
Turned on now? Yes, okay. So, it's been really fabulous to hear all the excellent work that's going on. Thank you to everybody who presented and gave a poster. My mind is buzzing. I am really excited to tell you today about a project that I worked on with colleagues at Carleton University, and I want to in particular highlight Charlotte, who's sitting right there. So this is a project that was led by 7 graduate students: Charlotte, Justin, Stasha, Caitlin, Joel, Lily, and Alexa, with a little bit of TLC and some occasional coffee breaks with the rest of us on this list. And the title of the presentation is a mouthful, but can I just see a show of hands who here has ever been in any way involved with an overall benefit permit in Ontario? Okay, so put another way, we wanted to know how the overall benefit thing was actually working. And the project is bigger than our topic of interest today, so at another time we can give you our results about Bubblelink and Redside Dace and Landing's Turtle for all the closet herpers in the room. But obviously today you want to hear about bats, so that's what I'm going to tell you about. I feel like I'm very loud. Am I too loud? No? Okay, cool. So quick review for those who aren't mired in this every day. Ontario's overall benefit framework is an offsetting approach that's designed to achieve more than no net loss. So I'm not here to say good or bad things about overall benefit. We wanted to evaluate how it's been implemented. Offsetting generally doesn't work really well for conservation. That is partly because many offsetting programs are based on this idea of no net loss. We paved over a wetland here to build a Walmart. Don't worry, we built a new wetland over here. Doesn't work very well, right? It takes ages for that wetland to function the way this one did, if it ever will. And all of the species that were over there don't magically reappear in the new wetland. So no net loss is not a great target. In theory, the overall benefit approach is intended to do more than that. And so I feel like I need to also point out that I didn't make this figure, if you're criticizing my graphic design skills. But from the Ontario website, we have the state of species at risk on that sort of, I don't know, chartreuse colored y-axis there. And you imagine the current state of, let's say, a bat species, that's the black bar. Let's say we're going to demolish a woodlot to put up a Walmart, and we expect that that will decrease the state of that species down to that red bar. But don't worry, the permitting process requires 2 pieces. The first one is that you take action to minimize adverse effects. So that is basically a no net loss mitigation approach. What are you going to do to reduce the harm that you cause to the species during the activity you're trying to get permitted for? The second piece here is the bit in green. So those actions to minimize adverse effects should bring the species state back up to something just under the current state. And then you're required to take actions that will also create overall benefit for the species. And that is defined as measurable improvement in the state of the species. There are more of that species of bat out there. The distribution of that species of bat has increased or remained stable. There are a couple sort of key principles, I guess, that are considered when writing an overall benefit permit. It is intended to be more than no net loss, more than an exchange of like for like. It's supposed to be grounded in the protection and recovery of species at risk, the target species at risk in particular, and it's supposed to be more than mitigation measures or replacing what is lost. And once the permit is written and approved, it ends up on the Environmental Registry of Ontario, where you can search for overall benefit permits and pull all of them up. And if you also click through to the archive, you can get every overall benefit permit that has been published on the ERO since the Endangered Species Act came into effect in 2007. So the team, including Charlotte, pulled 413. Oh, is that me? If I speak really loudly, can you still hear me? If I stand here, is that better? Okay. So the team pulled. Thank you, Brad. Okay.
Turn it on.
That will help. Yep. Amazing. Okay, the team pulled 413 overall benefit permits off the registry. And here's what we found. First of all, we found that Ontario species at risk are not evenly represented in overall benefit permits. So the gray bars on this figure are showing you the total number of species in each group, amphibians, birds, fishes, etc., that are listed on Ontario's species at risk in Ontario list. That's the totals. The black pieces of those bars are the number of species in each category that actually showed up in an overall benefit permit. So you can see that there are many, many listed species that have never showed up in an overall benefit permit. That's not necessarily a problem because these permits are issued in particular cases where harm to a species is anticipated, right? So if those other species never overlapped with one of those cases, they wouldn't show up in an overall benefit permit, may not be a problem. But the take home here is that there's uneven representation in those permits. I feel like this keeps fritzing out on me too. We also found that the number of overall benefit permits varied over time and over taxa. So the gray bars here are showing you the total number of approved permits per year from the first permits being issued in 2008 under the newly formed Endangered Species Act, all the way up to September 30th of 2023, which is when we decided to stop reading overall benefit permits and start putting the data together. You can see some trends here. There's a general increase in the gray bars, right? From the beginning through the McGuinty government and the Wynne government. The dotted lines here are showing you Ontario election years. And then there's an inexplicable drop in the number of permits issued in 2018, very strange. And it doesn't really go all the way back up again. The other thing you'll notice is there is a general decrease associated with there is a decrease in the 2014 election year as well, and we think that that may just be because of the pause on civil service activities during the election period. There's like a 2-month window where everything kind of shuts down while the election happens. So there's these, temporal trends, and we can talk about reasons for that later. But what you're really excited about here today are bats. So if we look just at the permits issued for mammals, so that's those green inset bars, that is 3 permits that included caribou, and the rest are bats. None of the other mammals showed up in overall benefit permits, but those 4 bats that are listed as at risk in Ontario did. And that was 22 permits in total. And so I want to walk you through the actions that have been prescribed to achieve overall benefit. So if we go back to the goal of this study, the overall benefit framework has been running for about 15 years now. It is applied usually at the district office level. Somebody sits down, looks at what's going to happen that causes harm to the species, looks at what the proponent is proposing to do to minimize that harm and also achieve overall benefit, and then has a discussion. Once they're happy with things, they sign off. That's the general process. So this has been happening for 15 years. How's that working out? So if we look at the actions for overall benefit for bats, this is not the actions to minimize adverse effects, just to achieve overall benefit. They fall into 5 general categories that we grouped based on the Conservation Actions Classification Scheme of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So here they are. The 5 categories were education and awareness, research, monitoring, land and water management, and species management. And let's zoom in on some of those. So for education and awareness, which showed up in about 18% of the permits that the team looked at, actions included educational outreach and posting signage of species at risk information in the area. This is awesome. I suspect I can assume that we all agree that this is unlikely to achieve overall benefit for bats. But it's great. We like education. Research. I like research. I do research. Research showed up in about 23% of the permits, and it included research on monitoring methods, research on white nose syndrome, research on artificial roost types. That's bat boxes. Monitoring activities included monitoring artificial hibernacula, surveying species at risk presence or habitat use, monitoring use of artificial roosts, bat boxes, monitoring artificial roost types, bat boxes, and monitoring or reporting on mitigation measures, usually bat boxes. And then we get into land and water management. So this is like the near and dear to my heart as a conservation scientist. We need to protect habitat. We need to create habitat. We need to restore habitat. This is all good stuff. So this is improving habitat connectivity, creating or improving different habitat types, reproduction, hibernacula, roosting habitat, foraging habitat, general habitat. Okay. And then we have 2 actions that were classified based on the IUCN scheme as species management, but are arguably just different kinds of habitat creation. This is creating or improving artificial hibernacula, and same thing with artificial roosts. Thanks, Shane. So if we go back to those 3 sort of guiding principles of overall benefit, I think our take-home message here is that these actions are great, but they are unlikely to actually achieve overall benefit for the species because many of them translate into replacing like for like. If you're taking down a woodlot and you're putting up bat boxes, you are replacing like for like. It is hard to argue that that is going to increase the state of the species. The red stars here are showing you actions specifically linked to bat boxes in particular. And I also want to flag that the research and monitoring actions are not, there's no requirement for that to ever get public. So if you have done work under an overall benefit permit and you've submitted your findings, that goes into a filing cabinet. And it is not even accessible to people within the 2 government ministries. Theoretically, hypothetically, somebody could FIPA it, and maybe you'd get it, and maybe it wouldn't be too redacted. But those results, although they could contribute to overall benefit for the species, don't have to be made public. And then the other big category here is around habitat creation, and that's really important. Green stars here are habitat creation points that could really benefit bats, but will have a huge time lag in between the creation of the habitat and their actual benefit to any of those 4 species. And so, again, it's hard to argue that this is going to achieve overall benefit for species that are declining now if that habitat will be useful, but probably not for about 10 years. So where do we go from here? I'm not actually here to criticize the overall benefit scheme. I'm here to highlight what all of us in this room can do, and I can do that quickly because Mike has said all of this already, and Brad said some of this already. If you're feeling like that's not good enough, you're right. But here's the thing. Those permits are written by folks sitting in an office somewhere who care deeply about bats, thanks, Shane, and want to get this right. And they have to justify the action that they tell the proponent that the proponent has to take. And it has to be rooted in science. And it has to be rooted in science they can show that person, ideally peer-reviewed, because then it looks credible. And when they don't have that, it's really hard for them to push for better conservation actions. And so the things that we can do to help and improve that status quo include evaluating those conservation actions for bats so that we know what actually works. Some of that work is happening already. Some of you presented on it. And communicating in a more effective way our monitoring and research results, not just in peer-reviewed papers for those of us who are in academia, but also directly to the people that are using this information to write those permits. And then we have this speeding train heading towards us. So it's hard enough to decide what would be overall benefit for the 4 currently listed species in Ontario. But there are 3 migratory tree bats that were assessed as endangered by COSEWIC. And they were assessed in November by COSARO, and COSARO will announce shortly what their decision on those bats is. And if they end up on the ESA list, we are suddenly going to be in a position where people come to us and say, hey, what's overall benefit for hoary bats? And guys, I don't know. Because the threat to hoary bats is mostly mortality from wind turbines and habitat loss. And if what we're trying to do is push as much wind turbine spinning as possible and enable development that involves habitat loss, I actually don't know of a way to balance that out. So if anyone's interested in working on this with us, we're hopefully going to start a working group soon to try and brainstorm better options for these 3 species, because I guarantee you we're going to start getting phone calls saying, well, what's the right action? And I don't think we have an answer yet. And if we don't have an answer, it's unfair to just sit here and criticize what the government's doing. Thanks, Shane. So if we think about what overall benefit looks like for these species, that's the first problem. And the second problem is that we're now on the clock. We have 10 years before COSEWIC has to reassess those 3 species. They were able to assess them this time because we had data from post-construction monitoring at wind turbines. COSARO was able to do a reasonably data-based assessment, whatever the outcome ends up being, because Ontario had data from post-construction monitoring at wind turbines, and we were able to estimate population trends based on that data. Many of those operations are past that window, and they no longer have to do those surveys. And guys, I don't know what we're supposed to reassess within 10 years. So that's the other thing that I would love people to join us for a big brainstorm about, because it's really, like, it's great that we're excited that these things have been recognized as endangered and need protection. But if they go back to the table in 10 years with no data, they will lose that protection. So that's where I wanted to end. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been great.
Thank you so much. I couldn't have asked for a better presentation to highlight my point. Are there any questions for Christina? None. Got one? Got a couple? Perfect.
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much. What does the group look like, and who are you looking for to join, and how many people? Basically, when are they getting together? All of that information.
That's a really good question. And I think what we're going to do is send an email to gauge interest out to the OBN list sometime in the next few months. I am swamped right now, and if I try and do it now, I'll screw it up. And set up a workshop probably for after most people's field seasons end in the fall, to try and get together and just brainstorm how we can make this more coordinated. And I think this also dovetails really well with some of the work that Mike is leading. So part of this conversation is making sure that we're not doubling up on something Mike is already doing. But I think the idea is for anybody who wants to join in, to join in. Like, we need everybody on board who wants to contribute.
That was actually my question too, but now I have a new one. If I can remember it. Oh, is this, like, the work that you guys were doing, is that being published or showcased anywhere? Because I know you mentioned that you looked at other species as well, so I was just wondering what that might look like for others.
The overall benefit?
Yeah.
Summary? Yeah. So the full story with Blanding's turtle and red-side dace and all the bats and everything. Butternut is big. Butternut is like all the plant permits almost are butternut. I think it's like 102 butternut permits, and then 32 is all the other plants. Yeah.
Basically just butternut and then like 11 species that have one permit each.
Yeah. So we are getting ready to submit that somewhere for publication, and then it will be publicly available. Yeah. Are there any groups that the overall benefit approach looks like it's working well for? No. So that's not fair. I think the thing with butternut is that we have pretty clear ideas about species management action specifically that we can take for butternut. And to be fair, butternut's not flying all over the place and hard to catch, so that helps. I would say, so butternut, bobolink, red-side dace, Blanding's turtle are the 4 that pop up the most. And for those species, most of there isn't a great alignment between the threats caused by the activity and the actions taken to offset them. Because when the threats are around habitat loss or mortality, and the actions taken are like some habitat creation over here, it's unlikely to have that overall benefit impact that they're, in theory, looking for. I guess I should also say, like, these things go in waves because politics change. And so it's possible that we're just in, like, a trough at the moment with regards to government priorities, and that things will get better. But I think things are more likely to get better as we come into our next government, whichever government that is, if it's clear to that government that people want these things protected, right? Like the current government underestimated how much the public cares about nature and the environment, the current provincial government. And that's fair. I mean, there are lots of different value systems out there, right? But when it became clear to them that actually people kind of like the green belt, they backed off the green belt, right? Like they did turn around and listen. And so I think we can get to similar outcomes from the species at risk angle as well if we can do better advocacy and make it clear to them that there is political support in their voting base for some of these things.
Really quick, just to follow up, do you think, on what you just said, do you think in that particular way that outreach and education would be a really good point to that, like to get more outreach out there so that when that new government comes in, we can be louder, I guess?
I love outreach and education. They make me so happy. They almost never turn into on-the-ground improvements in population viability. There are exceptions. I can't think of great Ontario exceptions. So I think that outreach and education are really important. I think we need to do them. I'm not suggesting we pull back on those activities, but they are not a stand-in for direct improvements to population viability. And I mean, the conflict is that direct improvements to population viability means limiting what we're doing on the landscape more. And that's hard, right? There's reasons that we're doing all those things. We all drove here, right? We're all sitting here in a room heated by possibly not wind energy. Like, you know, it's tricky. I'm not suggesting that, you know, we just need to care more, but the education and outreach side of things are not going to get us where we need to go. I know.
How do we be louder then, you know? Like, I don't know.
How do we be louder?
Yeah, like you're saying, we need to really focus on like caring, you know, that if we care enough and they hear us, you know, something like how do we be louder in that sense, if outreach and education is doing.
Okay, recognizing that you've all sat for a really long time and you're still stuck sitting here listening to me. Yeah, so a couple things. The really easy fix in terms of the overall benefits improvement, one really easy fix that everyone here could try and push for wherever possible is to get the data that are collected under the overall benefits made accessible, at least within the ministry and ideally publicly, right? And some of I think this has gotten better, like there's a recognition internally, I think, from reading the permits, that this was not working well and needs to be improved. So some of the more recent permits do have a requirement to make the data accessible, but most of them do not. I know that Mike is working on a federal level to solve this problem, but it's a different game provincially. But generally, write to your MP and your MPP. Go meet with your MP and your MPP. You can do that. Like, you can be noisy. Go be noisy.
Hi, Christina.
No? Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and thanks to your team for doing this type of analysis, because it's something that's not done very often and it takes a little bit of bravery to do so, so thank you. Being someone who has actually written the permits in the past, I wish that it was able to be acknowledged of what wanted to be in the permit and what ended up in the permit is one thing, just to comment on. That would be a really great analysis that I would love to see. But I have a question for you about the proactiveness of what you can do now for these other 3 species. Because you're already kind of preempting something and you have that foresight, is there a potential that you may highlight areas that need studied more instead of people randomly studying in their own little niches? What needs to be studied going forward so people could plan for that?
Is for these 3 species? Yeah, okay, because for the other ones, like, it's in the schedule of studies, right? According to the schedule of studies. I think the part of the problem that Canadian species at risk conservation has is that the kinds of questions that have to get asked to do an assessment at Kosiwik or Kosaro are not super sexy questions. So like we get around that in my lab, we get around that by like tying the monitoring work that will address the criteria to some fun behavioral question that we can sell to NSERC, right? But, and it also costs money. So I think if you want to be proactive about contributing to those assessments in the future, you want to take a look at the specific criteria that have to be addressed and fill those gaps. Those are the questions that will have to get answered at the table, and if we can't answer those clearly, the species will end up data deficient, right? But there needs to be funding to do that work, and there often isn't. And then going back to your previous point, yes. So on the overall benefit permits, I meant what I said. There's some amazing person who cares deeply about bats writing that permit. Like, this is not like government is bad, right? And oh, I should throw myself under the bus here. Some of those permits, I fully got a phone call internally when I still worked for Ontario saying, Christina, what's overall benefit in this case? And I was like, I don't know, right? So it's like, it's me too. I think on the published version, it also tells us what other alternatives were considered. And so there's always a list of like other things, and it often includes like, don't put the bridge there. And then it says they were considered. Nope. So you can see that somebody inside had the conversation and said, that's not a good place for that bridge. Okay. Because that's how the process works, right? It's a proponent-led process in Ontario at the moment. So, and I guess the other thing to highlight there is that the proponent-led process relies on all of the amazing consultants in the room who have to go out and do the environmental assessments ahead of those permits being written. And without all the awesome work you're doing, none of this would work in the first place. And I'm going to stop talking now, if that's okay.